And not only is it rough just in terms of the sheer resources, we know from the economic research the kind of investments we need to make in order to get the transformation. And those are investments in innovation, those are investments in education. But what happens when we have this sort of spatial relationships is we can't make those investments. Instead, they get crowded out by investments in repairing old bridges and building new bridges and all sorts of physical infrastructure, which by itself is a great thing. But as I said, it crowds out the more productive investment, which will lift us out and get us to the sort of transformation we need, such that we are quite literally choking on concrete. And so we are keen in getting at that issue here in Northeast Ohio. And so the question is, why does that happen? And the question is, why does it happen when we have really terrific government and elected leadership around the region? And again, it's because the systems aren't set up for us to be able to deal with this. Our regional councils or our MPOs don't have this as a mandate. We have these siloed responsibilities where an MPO is supposed to be primarily around federal transportation planning here, and we've got another group that's working on workforce, and this group that's working on economic development. We don't really have the skill set to come together. And what we're finding is, in our public opinion polling, the public doesn't even have a frame to have this conversation. Yet they know something is wrong, and they know something is broken in how this works. And so I guess the challenge I put forth is if you are facing this in your community, and for those of you who are out here from Northeast Ohio, is can we find a way as regional councils to change our spots and to have this conversation in our communities about what it is we want to be and how it is we want to work. What do we need to do in order to reshape the mandate to be able to speak regionally? What sort of skill sets do we need? What sort of new partnerships need to come together? And most importantly, how can we begin to have that conversation in the community, a conversation that doesn't pit exurbia versus suburbia, suburbia versus urbania, or whatever it's called, and come up with meaningful and workable solutions. We believe the principles for this, at least in Northeast Ohio, is, look, we're going to have a lot of fits and starts, but we ought to start where we can start. And we've got a couple of ideas around that. Maybe we'll get to it in the question. But to take people and help and have faith that they will recognize their best collective interest. My own experience, yours may be different, is that people aren't stupid, that they understand that the region can't survive without the city, and people in the city understand that they can't survive without the region, and that we can help people come to their best collective interest, and that a key to all this is to be connecting the dots and helping people understand these systems' costs. So again, here in Northeast Ohio, we're committed to this. This is systems change. We need to find a lever. The federal government is giving us a couple that we can grab hold of, and that we, philanthropy, at least in Northeast Ohio, are ready to go. But in my conversations with colleagues around the U.S., philanthropy is waking up to this issue in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and elsewhere. And the key is that we put the first step forward and get going now. So with that, let me stop, wish you a great conference, and hope that we can build some communities together. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. I think that is certainly a challenge to us at NOAC, and probably a challenge to everybody in the room. At this point, Brad has graciously agreed to answer some questions, if you have any.
How would you like to see regional councils transform to be part of the system you're trying to create?
Oh, so the question was not wanting to put noaca on the spot, which, what the heck, let's put them on the spot, is how would I like to see regional councils transform in order to meet this? As we've kicked this around in the fund and with business leaders and others, we believe there's great value in having regional competitiveness councils. And in those regional competitiveness councils would be where you can have different stakeholder groups come together who are looking at the broader set of issues, so that for us, if it's about jobs, incomes, and concentrated poverty, what is the agenda around that? And then how does that play out for transportation, workforce, and so forth? That, again, in our view of the world, you would have this competitiveness council and then have these rings that go out of sub-regional communities, community engagement, and the like. So, I don't know, Howard, do you want to answer that?
A little bit of a thought. We're basically governmental agencies, which means that we respond to legislation, we respond to regulations, we respond to money. I hate to be as blunt as that, but and often that's rare, because we've made attempts at looking at other areas that NOACA could get involved in. But it boils down to the fact that if we're going to be devoting resources to whatever the enterprise might be, you have to have resources coming in to help pay for the activity. It's not to say that you couldn't do it or that we couldn't do it, but that's kind of a fundamental challenge that we live with all the time.
Yeah, one thing I encourage you all not to apply. The Department of Housing and Urban, that was a joke. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, Department of Transportation, and EPA has come together with this Sustainable Communities Initiative. Who knows how that's going to work in practice, but boy, that's a great idea as it looks, and we're pretty excited about kind of pulling together to do that, and that principle is the kind of principle we need to make come alive regionally, I would say. Yeah.
I was particularly struck with the difference you talked about, the increase in population of 6% versus the land use at 60%. Land use development normally means growth. Growth means investment, shopping centers, residences, which is increasing the tax base. How do governments and regions deal with making sure that the land use growth more closely mirrors that population? Because it looks like with that land use growth, you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, so the question is, we have a system here in which we have the land use growth and the population growth. How do you get a system in which it's in the community's interest to do things the right way, because we're shooting ourselves in the foot, and that's right. The rules we have set up here in the rules we have in Ohio and most states absolutely pit us against each other. If I want to get AstroTurf on my football field, I sure as heck better get that shopping mall across the municipal border into my community. And then it's a winner-take-all game. I get all those tax revenues, I get the AstroTurf, and now yours is going to be back to grass, I guess. And so the one thing we've tried or exploring here is can we do more in terms of tax sharing and incentives so that we recognize that we're competing globally rather than competing with each other, so that when a company moves, that there is some sharing of the revenues across communities rather than it being just a one. We haven't implemented that, though. We're looking at what others have done, though, and that seems to be a step in the right direction. Yeah. In Hartford?
Workforce, look at the ingredients, talking about education workforce is one of the things I worry about, which is replacement of the existing skilled workforce. And the trend lines in a number of our metropolitan areas are not in the right direction. Maybe you want to comment on that, because I think the issue of, you can have snappy infrastructure, you can have nice transit, you can have good airports, you can have a variety of things, but you don't have the people with the skill sets for your new entrepreneurs to take advantage and leverage. What's your take on the whole issue of K-12 success as well as post-secondary college and school employers?
Yeah. So the question is workforce, and are we not building a house of cards if you don't address the fundamental workforce and skills issues? We did this huge econometric analysis to say what are the drivers of the long term of an economy, and of course what it came back with and said there is no single thing that explains the economic health of a community.